Well, I want to welcome everyone to this panel discussion, Claiming Identities That Aren't Theirs, Pretendians and Messianic Jews. My name is Gordon Bronitsky. First, I want to thank Rabbi Michael Baio, the CEO of the East Valley Jewish Community Center and Center for Holocaust Education, for sponsoring this discussion. And I also want to thank his excellent staff, especially Lisa Woldoff, for their hard work to make this happen. And personally, I would like to thank David Cornselk of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma for years of discussion by email and Facebook Messenger, which ultimately led to this discussion. Now, before I introduce the speakers, let me tell you that everyone is going to be muted throughout this, except, of course, the speakers. So please put your questions in the chat. Each speaker will speak for about 20 minutes, more or less, and then there will be time for questions and answers. And if you can, put in where you're from. We'd like to know where you're from. So let me introduce the first speaker, which is Rabbi Stuart Federow. Rabbi Federow has been the rabbi of Congregation Sha'ar HaShalom of Houston, Texas, since 1995, after serving as the Hillel director for Greater Houston and serving as a rabbi in Lancaster, California, and Greenville, Mississippi. He is the author of the book, Judaism and Christianity, A Contrast, and has authored a chapter called Missionaries in a publication by the official body of Reformed Judaism, Where We Stand. He is also, among other things, the first rabbi in the history of Houston Baptist University to teach in its Department of Christianity and Philosophy, Teaching and Introduction to Judaism. He's worked extensively in this area of claiming identities that aren't theirs. And with that, I give you Rabbi Federow. Welcome.
Thank you. And thank you very much. And a deep thanks to our moderator, Gordon Bronitsky, for inviting me to speak. Also to Rabbi Harry Rosenfeld, if you're here, thank you for suggesting me. Thank you also to the East Valley Jewish Community Center for sponsoring. I'm to speak on two issues tonight. The first is, why do Messianic Jews, why do pretend Jews claim that they are Jews when they are not? And second, what is the effect on Jews and the Jewish community because of these Messianic Jews? I believe that the answer to this first question is very complicated. Why do pretend Jews pretend to be Jews? Why do they even exist? Which I think is a very different answer than why do pretendians pretend to be Indians? The truth is, I don't know anything of the Native American experience. So let me ask rhetorically, I guess, are there non-Indian groups and non-Indian organizations that spend hundreds of millions of dollars annually to create programs and give lessons to whites on how to act and pretend one is a Native American Indian, as Christian churches and denominations do to enable Messianic Jews to exist and to deceive? The creation of Messianic Jews, pretend Jews, began as a technique to convert, to missionize the Jews to Christianity. To make a long story short and try to keep my speech short, good luck on that, suffice it to say that a Baptist ordained minister, Martin Rosen, who worked for an organization called the American Board of Missions to the Jews, read a book by Donald McGavran called Understanding Church Growth, first published in 1970, providing a more scientific way to missionize others to Christianity. And Reverend Martin Rosen used those ideas to better convert Jews. So why do Christians missionize us and create Messianic Jews, pretend Jews? Christian missionizing began, of course, with the Great Commission from Matthew 28:18-20, which is supposedly Jesus' command to his disciples and followers to go ye therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Ghost. Now, of course, those who know Hebrew or Aramaic would know that when Jesus said to teach all nations, he spoke Aramaic or Hebrew, and the word he would have used for the word nations is the word goyim, which after the Babylonian exile was used to refer only to the non-Jewish nations. So Jesus was actually commanding his disciples and followers to go to the goyim, the non-Jews, not the Jews. He changed his mind from go only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel in Matthew 10:6 in the beginning of his ministry, to go to the nations, the non-Jewish nations, the goyim, at the end of his ministry in chapter 28:19. Furthermore, there's a priority given to missionizing specifically the Jews, as Paul writes to the Jew first and also to the Greek in Romans 1:16 and Romans 2:10. The book by Donald McGavran has a whole section on the sociology of missionizing, which basically said to remove all social obstacles from your target groups to conversion and make the targets believe that in order to become a Christian, they are not leaving their social group with whom they identify. So, following this advice in this book, the Baptist minister, the Reverend Martin Rosen, changed his name to Moshe Rosen and began to use Hebrew for all Christian terminology. Don't say New Testament, say Brit Chadashah. Don't say Mary, say Miriam. Don't say Joseph, say Yosef. Don't say cross, say tree, just a few examples. All because these words might turn off your Jewish targets to conversion, and they'll see this as leaving their Jewishness for Christianity. Following the advice of the book, the Reverend Martin Rosen, Moshe Rosen now, did all he could to make the lie seem true that they have not left the Jewish people and that one can be a Jew and a Christian at the same time. They removed all signs of the cross from their churches. They stopped calling it a church, but rather a synagogue. They used a Torah scroll, not a Bible, with the New Testament in it, and on and on. These, of course, were according to the standards set by Paul that deceptive means are justified by the ends. In his epistles in the Christian New Testament, he specifically says this 4 times. Romans chapter 3, verse 7. For if the truth of God has more abounded through my lie unto his glory, why yet am I also judged as a sinner? The main quotation that even Messianic missionaries quote to justify their deception is 1 Corinthians chapter 9, 20-22. And see, unto the Jews I became as a Jew, that I might gain the Jews. To them that are under the law, as under the law, that I might gain them that are under the law. To them that are without law, as without law, being not without law to God, but under the law to Christ, that I might gain them that are without law. To the weak became I as weak, that I might gain the weak. I am made all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. 2 Corinthians 12:16. But be it so, I did not burn you. Nevertheless, being crafty, I caught you with guile. Philippians chapter 1, verse 18. What then? Notwithstanding every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is preached, and I therein do rejoice, yea, and will rejoice. Worse, Christians, which is a term that includes Messianic Jews, they claim very insultingly to Judaism and the Jewish people that now they are completed Jews, since to be just a Jew is to be incomplete, because Judaism is complete without Jesus. Martin Rosen, Moshe Rosen, the Baptist minister, also changed the name of his organization that he worked for, the American Board of Missions to the Jews, to Jews for Jesus. And it worked, but probably not the way he thought it would, because although it worked to convert ignorant and troubled Jews to Christianity, far more so it attracted those who were never Jews, who had no ancestors that were Jews. Why? So that regular Christians would not just be for Jesus, but rather it enabled them to call themselves Jews for Jesus. By becoming Messianic Jews, pretend Jews, they are now Jews just like their Jesus. So there are 2 groups of pretend Jews that real Jews have to deal with. Some pretend Jews, the minority, really do have some Jewish ancestry, little education to what that means. And the majority of Messianic Jews never were Jews with no Jewish ancestry. Each of these 2 have their own motivations for being pretend Jews. Messianic is an interesting term. Messiah means anointed. The word Christ means anointed. So Christ is the same as Messiah, and Christian is the same as Messianic. It's more attractive, of course, to their Jewish targets to say Messianic than to say Christian. So Christians have to deny being Christians to Jews to get them to convert. More often than not, the product of the missionizing of the Jews for Jesus organization and their product, the Messianic community, were Christians who made themselves appear to be Jews, who also wear talits and black clothing and model their services after Jewish services and keep kosher and keep the Sabbath, more or less, because their Jesus was a Jew. Why? They erroneously thought their Jesus did the things Jews do today, ritually. One example, they wrongly thought that their Jesus Last Supper was a Passover Seder, so the Messianics decided to do Seders and other Jewish rituals and celebrations. They started Judaizing their Christianity and Christianizing Judaism, what Paul actually forbade in the book of Galatians. And now a bad effect of the Messianics, even normative liberal Christian churches, Episcopalian, Presbyterian, Methodist, other churches are doing Seders. It's nothing but cultural appropriation because they think their Jesus was at a Seder at the Last Supper. The Seders they create are not Jewish. They are Christianized to reflect Christian theology. Ask me later how they are Christianized. I could be wrong, but do pretendians reinterpret the meaning of Native American rituals to be really reflecting white culture, showing that the basis of white culture is really Native American? Now, since the Jewish converts to Christianity, the product of their missionizing, they couldn't just join churches. That would defeat the appearance that they were still Jews. They therefore created Messianic synagogues and Messianic organizations so that they could feel that they were still doing what was Jewish, still Jewish form without Christian, Jewish form with Christian content. Another only Christian and not Jewish concept that enabled Christian missionaries and those who had no Jewish ancestry to claim they are Jews, creating pretend Jews, Messianic Jews, is the Christian concept of grafted in, found in Romans 11. It claims that Christians, because of their faith, are grafted onto the Jews, and of course, then they are the real Jews with the covenant with God because the Jews rejected the Christian Jesus and lost their covenant. Is there such a concept in white culture that whites can be grafted in to be a Native American Indian? Well, there's no such thing as to be grafted in to be a Jew either. For the sake of brevity, ask me later if you're interested, a botany lesson, the truth about what being grafted in means. The world sees the Jews as a race. Up until the forced conversions in Catholic Spain in the late 1300s, which eventually resulted in the Spanish Inquisition beginning in 1492, the Jews were not thought of as a race. At any rate, now to the world, one who is a Jew remains a Jew no matter what they do, no matter what they believe, or how they act, because you can't change their race, because they can't change their race, even though we are not a race. And to the rest of the world, anyone who acts like a Jew or dresses like a Jew must actually be a Jew. And so Messianic Jews, pretend Jews, whether they were once Jews or not, they must be Jews too because they seem to do what Jews do, so they must really be Jews still. The pretend Jews get instant credibility as Jews because they play dress up as Jews. For Native American Indians, a simple DNA test shows that either one is or is not a Native American Indian, I think. But for the Jews, DNA means nothing. It might tell us about someone's ancestry, but that says nothing about that person. Even if a person's DNA test shows 100% Jewish ancestry, basically, if they are of another faith, they would have to convert to be considered Jews by the Jewish community. It is Judaism and Jewish law that determines who is a Jew. It is not ex-Jews who are now Christians, not Christians who are just wannabe Jews, and not Messianic Jews who are just LARPing as Jews. LARP is live action role play, and they are live action role playing as Jews. They are Christian wolves in Jewish sheep's clothing. Jews say who is a Jew, unless of course Christians want Jews to determine who is a Christian. I don't think they'd like our conclusions. Jewish law is clear. As the Orthodox Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, writing for the Union of Orthodox Jewish Congregations of America and for the Orthodox youth group called the National Conference of Synagogue Youth, page 270 of the Aryeh Kaplan Anthology, Volume 1, the section called The Real Messiah, he wrote, "This brings us back to our original question, what can a Jew lose by embracing Christianity? The answer is everything. Christianity negates the fundamentals of Jewish faith, and one who accepts it rejects the very essence of Judaism. Even if he continues to keep all of the rituals, it is the same as if he abandoned Judaism completely. A Jew who accepts Christianity might want to call himself a Jewish Christian, but he is no longer a Jew," end of quote. Rabbi Kaplan cites Maimonides, Mishneh Torah, Avodat Kochavim, chapter 2, paragraph 5, as a reference for this Jewish law. These are just two rabbis, Aryeh Kaplan and Maimonides, of many rabbis in many responsa that said that a Jew who converts to another faith is no longer a Jew. Jews who accept Christianity, even in the guise of Messianic Judaism, might want to call themselves a Jewish Christian, a Hebrew Christian, a Jew for Jesus, or a Messianic Jew, or whatever they're going to call themselves this week, but they are no longer Jews. Now, having said all that, there are also a lot of similarities, but I believe the similarities are found in the negative effect Messianic Jews have on the Jewish community. I mentioned one, that Christian churches are committing cultural appropriation by holding Passover Seders, distorting and perverting our rituals and holidays. There are social benefits to lie and say that one is Native American, and the same for becoming a Messianic Jew. For the Pretendians, I think the benefits are found in our general society, but for the Messianic Jews, I believe the social benefits are found within the Christian community, because it is a greater catch for the Christians to get a real, live, honest Jew than to get a non-Jew. If one can pretend one was a Jew, the one who claims to be a Jew has greater status in his Christian community, Messianic or otherwise. Messianic Jews, because they claim to be Jews, then assert that they can represent and speak for the Jewish communities they do not belong to, and the Judaism they no longer believe in or ever believed in. And what they teach has more in common with their evangelical Christian community than with anything at all that is Jewish. There are people all over the United States, all over the world, who learn all they know about Judaism and Jews from Messianics and other Christians. And it is true that when Christians teach other Christians about Jews and Judaism, what they teach is wrong, because they are teaching Judaism from a Christian perspective. Messianic Jews have achieved status in academia, representing the Judaism they were never a part of, and you would not believe the number of academic papers, popular books, commentaries on the Bible and translations out there that claim to be truly Jewish, like the Complete Jewish Bible, all because they take a normative translation, King James, New International Version, or whatever, and change all names and important words to sound Jewish, like changing them to Hebrew, to make the translation and or the commentaries sound Jewish. And to further make it sound more Jewish, they'll quote from rabbinic sources, interpretations, and commentaries that sound like they reflect Christian theology. They lie. They teach a Judaism that is evangelical fundamentalist Christianity. Now, I was told that for goods manufactured by Native American Indians, there is the Indian Arts and Crafts Act of 1990, a truth in advertising law which prohibits misrepresentation and marketing of American Indian or Alaska Native arts and crafts products within the United States. There is no such law for the Jews and for Jewish products, Jewish ritual items, Jewish holidays, Jewish holy days, and Jewish life cycle events. All you have to do is just go to Google and Google anything Jewish or an object that is truly Jewish, like a talit, a prayer shawl, or we have Hanukkah coming up. So Google a Hanukkah menorah, also called a Chanukiah, and see how many websites that come up are Messianic and not Jewish. Go see how many normative Christian churches and families are having bar mitzvahs for their kids, and they are not pretending to be Jews. They think it's okay because they are grafted in or because they think Christianity is a Jewish sect. Pretendians may be pretendians because doing so gives them the claim on land in America. I don't know if you know this, but there's a whole group of pretend Jews and Messianics who call themselves Ephraimites, and they honestly expect that as Messianic Jews, pretend Jews, from the half-tribe of Ephraim, of course, it means they should be given their rightful land in the promised land of Israel as members of one of the 12 tribes of Israel. A pretend Jew may appear to be outwardly Jewish, but do something the whole world knows real Jews are not supposed to do, like eat a ham sandwich or have their bacon and eggs at a restaurant while wearing their yarmulke and their beard and black clothing and everything Jewish. And thereby, they make the non-Jewish world think, see, the Jews are hypocrites, which validates how the New Testament portrays Jews, calling us hypocrites and blind. A person who claims to be Native American will be given priority for college entrance. Do you think someone pretending to be Jewish will get a higher priority for college entrance? There used to be quota systems to keep Jews out. There still are. Jews are less than 2% of the US population. I have been told to my face by a college dean that the Jews are not a minority because, you know, all Jews are rich and privileged and not ever oppressed. By the way, 20% of American Jewish community live at or below the poverty level, and clear statistics from the FBI show that Jews are more than twice as likely to be targeted for hate crimes as Muslims and close to 3 times more likely to be targeted than blacks. And I'm sorry, I couldn't find the information to compare with the Native American community. As we have seen in our identity politics society, one can improve one's chances of getting elected if one is a pretendian. Do you think one increases their chances of getting elected if one pretends to be a Jew? Indigenous communities have always self-policed and spread word of frauds. But when Jews cry foul because someone claims to be a Jew when they are not, we Jews are accused of gatekeeping or being prejudiced. Some have even called us anti-Semitic for crying foul against pretend Jews. Christian privilege and Christian supremacy that supports Messianic Jews, pretend Jews, silences real Jews, and makes them hesitate to be Jewish outwardly and openly, and it silences them from objecting to the horrible effects of Messianic Jews on the Jewish community. Two very recent stories, courtesy of the Today Show on NBC. On Today with Hoda and Jenna, recently, they welcomed back on the air Kathy Lee Gifford, whose grandfather was a Russian Jew, which does not at all make her Jewish at all. And Kathy brought with her her Messianic rabbi, Jason Sobel, on NBC, to tell the world all about the new Jewish book they wrote together, The Rock, the Road, and the Rabbi. The Rock, of course, is Jesus, the Road is Israel, and the Rabbi is Rabbi Sobel. Published, of course, by that well-known Jewish publishing company, Thomas Nelson. By the way, Thomas Nelson isn't Jewish. I just thought I'd make sure you knew it's Christian. Second story, 2 days ago, Monday, December 5th, actor-singer Jill Scott on the Today Show spoke of her giving her son a bro mitzvah by taking him on a trip to Africa. She was raised as a Jehovah's Witness, not Jewish, but everybody applauded. They were thrilled. If someone who is clearly a pretendian did the same thing using a Native American ritual on national TV, what do you think would happen? Loud screams about cultural appropriation, but it's okay to do that to Jewish culture. Another way we are hurt by Messianic Jews, pretend Jews. You see, Messianic Jews, pretend Jews depend on non-Jews not knowing what they are looking at or knowing what constitutes legitimate Jewish identity. There's a pattern that pretend Jews follow. They exploit people's lack of knowledge about who Jews really are and what Jews really believe and what Jews really do. And what they teach is just wrong, inaccurate at best, and stupid at worst. But the world, basically ignorant, believes it to be authentic. And when real Jews try to correct the misinformation, we're told we're wrong. Self-identification used to be trustworthy. If someone said they were a Jew, the Jewish community would take them at their word. Now Christians infiltrate Jewish communities by claiming to be Jewish, and there will be a lot of distrust for the stranger who walks into a synagogue or Jewish organization. I'm not talking about terrorists and violence, but because we cannot trust someone telling us they're Jewish. People have lied to convert to Judaism, to infiltrate and missionize the Jews, both in Israel and in the US, casting doubt on all those who want to convert and who have already converted honestly and sincerely. For both of our communities, impersonation is not an accident. People do it to get something they want, and they do it at the expense of those members of our two minorities. For Jews, it is not just individuals making a choice to deceive. It's also organizations that missionize and Christian groups that are wannabe Jews who create Messianic pretend Jews, and they are winning. Final word, and I really feel I have to say this. Thank God for Gordon Bronitsky. Thank God for Jacqueline Keeler. And you laugh, but I'm serious. And thank God for the East Valley Jewish Community Center. If I learned anything as a Hillel director, it's that you've got to make connections. You've got to have connections with other groups because there is strength in numbers, and the real Jews and the real Native American Indians together can better fight those who do our communities such incredible harm. Thank you, and thank you again and again.
All right. Okay, people can hear me, I assume?
Yep.
Okay, let me introduce our second speaker. Our second speaker is going to be Jacqueline Keeler. She is a Diné and Dakota writer living in Portland, Oregon. Her writing has appeared in The Nation, NBC News, New York Times, Indian Country Today, Sierra Magazine, and others. And she's been interviewed on PRI's The World and by BBC and MSNBC and Democracy Now! She wrote a book in 2021 comparing what happened at Standing Rock to what happened with the Bundys at Malheur in Oregon. And she has been very, very active in, I think I can say this, unmasking people who claim to be Indian but are not. And with that, I give you Jacqueline Keeler. Welcome.
Thank you, Gordon. Thank you for inviting me. I've learned so much just listening to the rabbi. I just wow, it's amazing to me because there are so many similarities to what we're undergoing. I had no idea this was happening It's so insidious, Jamie. So I thought what I would do is just sort of read my recent response that I gave, because it's pretty comprehensive, in the San Francisco Chronicle. Sort of on what is, my editor asked me to write an article about what is an Indian, right? And so this is what I came up with. So it'll help explain some of the background of what's going on. So this came out a couple weeks ago. In an era where people from across the hemisphere want to, quote, reconnect with their Indigenous ancestry, and the Supreme Court debates if American Indians are a race or a political group, what is tribal citizenship and why does it matter? So I should say that we are not a race. You cannot enroll in any tribe by getting a DNA test. There is no DNA test that can actually assess what your tribe is, and tribes don't accept it. They only accept them as paternity tests. And because being Native American is a political, we are citizens of tribal nations that pre-existed the creation of the United States or the coming of Europeans. And so we are political, not a race. Last month, I published a piece in in October, I published a piece in the San Francisco Chronicle investigating claims to American Indian identity by the late actress and activist Sacheen Littlefeather. After speaking to her biological sisters and reviewing her family tree back to the 1850s, I found that Littlefeather was not of Apache heritage. As she presented herself the night she became internationally known for taking the Oscar stage in lieu of Marlon Brando, and in the intervening 50 years until her death. She was of white and Mexican descent and had no legitimate claims to tribal identity. I knew the piece would be controversial, taking down an icon, especially in the wake of her death. Was bound to arouse anger from those who found her work meaningful. But I will concede that I wasn't fully prepared for the debate that followed, one that posited Littlefeather's identity and all Native American identity as an existential question, too complicated to verify or fact check. This line of argumentation largely conceded that Littlefeather was dishonest in her self-presentation, but nonetheless suggested that her claims to American Indian heritage, however threadbare, were open to a wider and more fluid interpretation. A New York Times story on my piece titled Sacheen Littlefeather and the Questions of Native Identity quoted Littlefeather's longtime friend and Shoshone Ojibwe poet Nila Northson, she spells her name in all lowercase letters, as saying Native identity is, quote, what you feel in your heart and what your belief system is, unquote. The Academy Museum of Motion Pictures, meanwhile, which recently held an internationally publicized event to apologize to Littlefeather for how she was treated in the March 1973 telecast of the Oscars, told the Times it would not reconsider how it characterized Littlefeather's identity in response to the findings of my article. The museum recognizes, quote, self-identification. Perhaps most egregiously, a headline in the Washington Post on the day of on the first day of Native American Heritage Month, nonetheless, asked Sacheen Littlefeather may have lied about her identity. Does it matter? Yes, it does. So muddying the waters of American identity clearly enables non-Native opportunists to play Indian for clout or money. And you don't have to look very hard to find the evidence, the harm these pretendians cause. So just days before my story published, UC Berkeley professor Elizabeth Hoover on October 20th, 2022, released a statement that after questions have been raised regarding her claims to Mohawk identity, that she and her family had conducted genealogical research to verify tribal descent, and, quote, we have to date found no records of tribal citizenship for any of my family members in the tribal databases that were accessed. Essentially, what I am currently left with is that I do not have any official documentation to verify the way my family has identified, unquote. In response, in a group letter dated November 11, 2022, former students of Berkeley professor Elizabeth Hoover detailed how her false claims of Native American identity harmed them and demanded her resignation and an apology to the Mohawk of Kanawake and to stop performing Native American identity. The students also expressed their, quote, extreme disappointment with the university's performative statements and inaction. They went on to demand Berkeley develop a system of protocols that allow for a deeper understanding of faculty applicants' ethics in working with Indigenous communities, work with other departments on campus to understand how the campus can adopt a better hiring and screening process to protect the Indigenous community. In 2019, the Los Angeles Times found that a fake Cherokee tribe, the Northern Cherokee Nation, had wrongfully garnered nearly $300 million in government contracts intended for actual Native Americans. I spoke to the Adam, he's the reporter on that story a couple weeks, maybe just last week. And he said that they continue calculating the amount and it came to almost $1 billion, I think the final amount. And one of them was actually President, what's his name? Kevin McCarthy, the upcoming Speaker of the House. His brother-in-law had formed a fake tribe and gotten $7 million and stuff. So a failure by the media and others to appropriately specify what it means to be American Indian is the origin of grifts like these and enables their prevalence. Similarly, missing from the coverage of Little Feather was an accurate definition of pretendianism. Refusing to define these terms give con artists free rein to exploit American Indian heritage with no accountability. After all, how is verification possible if anyone can claim authenticity without any proof? Speaking to a group of Native American professionals and leaders who meet regularly to discuss the issue of pretendianism, all felt that there is a need for a definition that employers and allies can use to weed out false claims to American identity in employment. The U.S. government's legal definition of American Indian is basically a member of one of 574 federally recognized tribes. Despite most opportunities relying on self-identification, seldom claiming tribal enrollment, and relying on vague claims of descent, most Native people I spoke to agreed tribal citizenship is still an excellent place to start because American Indian, Native American identity in the United States is political, not racial. Tribal experiences are derived from immediate relatives' experiences as nationals of a Native nation that pre-existed European colonialism and whose homelands constitute the lower 48 states of the United States. Only tribal citizens of these nations are subject to U.S. Indian federal policy and laws that no one else is subject to in this country. These laws also do not apply in Mexico or Canada, nor to other indigenous nations like Hawaii or territories like Puerto Rico. American Indian tribes pursue a nation-to-nation relationship with the most powerful nation on earth. As only citizens of our countries are subject to the political and legal consequences of this relationship, only we have the standing to address these issues and the resultant trauma. Many of Little Feather's defenders, however, continue on social media to trumpet her father's Mexican ancestry as a way of propping up her claim to American Indian identity. Their claim is based on a couple of assumptions. All Mexican people are part indigenous, and tribes routinely cross borders to being indigenous to Mexico should be no barrier to calling oneself American Indian or Native American and claiming the trauma of those tribes as their own. In a Variety opinion piece addressing my investigation into Little Feather, Laura Clark, a Muskogee citizen who works for Yahoo News, raised the specter of blood quantum as a reason to tread lightly with suspected fraud's claims to American identity. Some natives are reconnecting with their tribes, Clark wrote. Some natives don't have enough Indian blood to register because of blood quantum minimums. And some natives have had their tribes nearly erased to the point that organized citizenship records simply don't exist. I would never deny the right of Little Feather or anyone else to respectfully reconnect with their Native ancestry so much as it exists. But a pretendian is not someone who is privately and genuinely trying to find their Native relatives. A pretendian is someone falsely claiming Native identity who uses this fraudulent claim for clout and in monetization schemes. They write books and speak for American Indians on the national and international stage before Congress, the United Nations, or in Little Feather's case, the Oscars. The moral weight of their voice is born not from any singular ability, but from the power of a collective trauma that is not theirs to wield. Prior to the passage of the Voting Rights Act, the Arizona Supreme Court found that since American Indians were legally wards of the federal government, they had the same status as insane people and could not vote. Only American Indian citizens of Native nations were subject to these policies. For my mother's people, the Navajo or Diné people, as we call ourselves, the trauma inflicted on us by the United States included being rounded up and sent on the Long Walk or Huelde or Bosque Redondo, where a concentration camp. Thousands died there. For my father's people, it led to Wounded Knee, where the U.S. Army massacred Lakota people. My Dakota grandmother's uncle, the Reverend Charles Cook, a young Dakota Episcopal minister at Pine Ridge, worked with Dr. Charles Eastman, the Dakota author and medical doctor, to save the survivors. The two young Dakota men rode out for days during a blizzard looking for survivors. The church, decorated for Christmas, was turned into a makeshift hospital with wounded women, children, and elders lying beneath a banner that read, "Peace on Earth, Goodwill to Men." My great-great-uncle lost his faith that day. My grandmother claimed he died of a broken heart a few years later. Experiences like these are directly tied to being American Indian. Littlefeather's relatives were legally white. They were allowed to vote 6 decades before the passage of the Voting Rights Act in Arizona. Anyone whose family was legally white for nearly 2 centuries possessed none of these experiences or trauma. For many Americans, the notion of the secret Indian in the family hiding out as a white person several generations ago is a compelling one. However, even if true, and it often is not, this is not enough to confer a national identity, any more than being an American of minuscule French descent gives one the same status as a French national. To argue otherwise doesn't just put tribal sovereignty under threat, it undermines genealogy, the methodology used to verify tribal claims. Some schools of thought in academia suggest that tribal documentation is inherently colonial, thus using it to prove fraud is not decolonial. But according to David Cornsilk, a renowned Cherokee genealogist, this thinking is ahistorical. I'm quoting from David now. The genealogies upon which Native people rely are not a byproduct of colonial constructs, he told me. Genealogists are often sacred to specific populations, including Kanake Maoli, Native Hawaiians, and Cherokee. Most Indigenous populations place a high degree of reverence for ancestors and the interrelationships between past and present our genealogies represent. When genealogy is attacked to defend false claims of tribal heritage, the attacker is actually besmirching the ancestors that genealogy represents. For Cherokees, the most appropriated ethnicity by race shifters, what we call the great spider web of families, representing every Cherokee family and their connections to each other by blood, marriage, and community, clan and community, is torn apart when a pretendian attempts to force themselves into that web. This has a particular relevance to two U.S. Supreme Court cases heard in the past month, one regarding affirmative action and the other the 1978 Indian Child Welfare Act. Conservative justices, including Samuel Alito, Clarence Thomas, and Amy Coney Barrett, have questioned whether American Indians constitute a race or a political affiliation based on tribe. If they decide we are a, quote, race, based on some notion of distant DNA, it will almost certainly destroy the political status of tribes and completely undermine tribal sovereignty to the extent it exists today. Tribal enrollment requirements are currently set by tribal nations and can only be changed by the tribe's citizens. Tribal citizenship based on the right of blood, jus sanguinis, my Latin isn't great, rather than the U.S. standard of the right of soil, jus soli, is an expression of the nation's sovereignty to determine its citizenship requirements. Kim Tallbear, professor at the University of Alberta and a citizen of the Siksika tribe in South Dakota, is the author of Native American DNA, Tribal Belonging and the False Promise of Genetic Science, which investigates how Native Americans' claim to land, resources, and sovereignty that have taken generations to ratify may be seriously and permanently undermined by those using fractional DNA tests to support. Genetic ancestry tests are useless for tribal, this is quoting Kim, tribal enrollment or even making a definitive statement about one's descent from a particular tribe, she said in an interview. False claimants to Native identity, like Elizabeth Warren, may take a genetic ancestry test, but it does not verify descent from a named individual ancestor. Rather, such a test links one probably to distant genetic ancestors that cannot be definitively affiliated with a contemporary tribe. While a move towards a preferred Native identity, a real-life cosplay experience, bringing up LARPing, may be liberating for the individual, it dangerously erases the political reality and history of oppression experienced by tribal nations and their citizens. The confusion about Native American Indian identity created by those who seek to eclipse our political nature for personal gain is only providing ammunition to conservative Supreme Court justice to complete the genocide of our nations. On October 31st, at a Supreme Court hearing of a case on affirmative action, conservative Justice Samuel Alito asked the attorney defending affirmative action policies at the University of North Carolina, what is preventing students from falsely claiming to be Native American, a practice colloquially called box checking. When asked if family lore of Native ancestry would be enough to be considered American Indian by Alito, North Carolina Solicitor General Ryan Park responded saying no. Justice Alito rephrased the question. I identify as an American Indian because I've always been told that some ancestor back in the old days was an American Indian. Once again, Park agreed that the student was unlikely to be telling the truth. This exchange was interpreted by news outlets as Alito referring to Senator Elizabeth Warren. Warren has been excoriated by the right-wing press for marking herself as American Indian on her Texas bar registration card. She was also identified by Harvard as a minority faculty member. In the 1990s, the university used her as an example of a diversity hire when challenged for their lack of people of color on faculty at the law school. Warren is far from the only person non-Native in academia to benefit from such an arrangement, and she is far from the most pernicious example, as demonstrated by Hoover. I have heard any number of Native American professors even questioning a colleague's vague claims of Native identity can lead to accusations by college and university administrators of racism. Hiring white people who self-identify as Cherokee or some other tribe, but with no lived experience as a Native person, does nothing to redress centuries of systemic exclusion of Native people from educational opportunities, said Tallbear. In fact, it constitutes another handout of resources to white people, stolen yet again from Native people. I would say it constitutes white Americans cynically stealing gains made by people of color in this country. Pretendianism is not just about replacing authentic Native voices with mummers in red face. It constitutes a disturbing financial taking from some of the poorest people in this country. The cost of pretendianism is more than just the misleading play acting of a role for an unsuspecting American audience. It causes harm to Native nations, communities, and individuals who have already endured enough. Fact-checking claims of Native American identity may appear unseemly to some, but it is a small imposition to reduce the continued trauma of Native Americans and the theft of our culture. A Lakota journalist I respect, Avis Little Eagle, who did reporting on fake New Age Native practitioners in the 1990s, recently reminded me of the old newspaperman's adage, if your mother says she loves you, verify, verify, verify.
Well, I thank both of these speakers. I know that I have a lot of questions, but why don't people who do have questions put them in the chat, and Tammy will read them and we will gain answers. Both of those presentations were just excellent. Oh, wait, you got to unmute yourself, Stuart, if that's what you're doing.
I am
Yes.
unmuted. I just attract your attention, but Jacqueline, I stand corrected about Native American and genetics, which fascinates me because your description is, except you go to the father, we go through the mother. It's the same thing. It's exactly the same
Tribes
thing.
are different. I mean, the Navajo Nation is matrilineal, so is the Iroquois
Okay,
Nation.
interesting.
So, yeah, and the Dakota people they use both. You know, they weigh both of them equally, each parent. You know, so it's you know, each nation is different. You know,
But the similarity, the mother father does, it's still parent, is just amazing to me. That's, again, it's another parallel.
Okay, so we have our first question here from Nathan Elberg, who asks, can an admittedly non-Native become a Native American through a decision of a legitimate tribal authority?
Yeah, they could. I mean, tribes can have the authority to enroll anybody they want to confer citizenship. There are rules that tribes have, constitutions that they follow as well. There would probably have to be, the whole tribe would have to vote for a constitutional amendment to make that happen. Like my dad's tribe, they actually would have to basically get a majority of the tribal members to agree to a constitutional amendment to admit that person. It could happen. It would be probably never happen, but it could.
Mhm.
It would be quite difficult. There is no such thing as adoption through some individual family adopting someone, because the individual Native family does not have the power to do that unless the tribe somehow agrees. And so, as I mentioned, it would be a process to do that. Quite, because I know that my own tribe, my dad's tribe, I was there when they were voting for a constitutional amendment and to make certain changes to the enrollment policies, and they didn't pass. It's quite hard to do. I would say it would be almost impossible to do, really. But it would be up to the tribal citizens, the majority of them, to make that choice. So it's possible. It's a political status, so you would have to you'd have to have a political response.
Thanks, Jacqueline. And then the next question is, what if someone belonged to a tribe that was so small they didn't have a tribal council?
So there are tribes that are very small. I would say it's really hard because, there are these tribes that have 6 people and a casino. And then there are tribes like mine, which have 400,000 citizens with a land base the size of Ireland, right? We're larger than 18 member states of the United Nations. So quite a broad range of groups, right? Of political groups. And so, but yeah, I mean, it's, if you want to research certain tribes and their history and how they work politically, there's a lot of information out there. I'd have to know the specific tribe that they're referencing.
Great, thank you. I don't see any more questions in the chat, but I do see that Leah has her hand raised. And so Leah, maybe you joined us after we started, but if you can put your question in the chat, we'll be sure to read it there. Richard asks, what is your drive, Ms. Keeler?
My drive? Well,
Maybe my tribe, maybe?
Oh, my tribe. Okay, so I am a citizen of the Navajo Nation, and my father is a Yankton Sioux tribal member, which are both federally recognized tribes. And but the way in the Navajo way, where we introduced ourselves through our clans, and those are matrilineal. And so my clan is Kia'ani, Towering House clan, and so it's a Kia'ani Nishle, and then I'm born from my father's people, who are the Ihangtawan Dakota, the Yankton Sioux people, and it's a Ihangtawan Dakota Bashashin. And then my grandfather's clan, my maternal grandfather's clan, my Shiche, his is Hashka'azo. So Hashka'azo, Doshanele, actually Doshe. And then my paternal grandfather is also Yankton Sioux, so he'd be Ihangtawan Dakota, Doshanele.
Great, thank you. And if you really meant drive instead of tribe, let us know in the chat and I'll re-ask the question. I don't see any other questions. If anybody has any other questions, please put them in the chat now.
Well,
We answered all the questions.
Yeah.
a
And
little enlightenment.
Gordon, not seeing any other questions, maybe you want to wrap up, or?
I would be happy to. First of all, please know please know that this has been recorded, and that I assume Tammy will let everyone know where you can see this recording. I really want to thank, first of all the people who signed up and who have been here to listen to this. And obviously, I'm very deeply appreciative of both Rabbi Federow, excuse me, and Jacqueline Keeler. Somebody asked me a couple days ago, why did I do this? And one of the things that I believe really strongly is that we're not alone, but we often think that we are. I know in the Jewish world, for instance, that we think we're the only people who suffer from people who claim to be us, but they're not us. And I work a lot with Native people, and I know a lot of them, they're the only people who are cursed with people who say they're them, but are not them. And I thought it would be very good just to bring people together and to listen.
Vital.
So that's why I did it. I was fortunate to have friends who recommended both of these speakers. I wouldn't have had a clue, and I'm going to have to thank them. But I'm really hoping that this leads to more conversation, more discussion. more working together. Somebody once said of me that I create spaces in which things happen. And this is that kind of a space where people talk, and hopefully everyone also listens. And we think we're not alone. You know, those people, they've got a kind of a same problem there. How do they deal with it? Is there something we could, you know, do together about, or maybe not, but just to know at the very most basic that in this particular case of people who claim to be us, who aren't us, that we're not alone. And I think often it's a good thing to know. And it gives you a basis for reaching out and for listening. But I do see there's at least, I'm looking real quick, one more question from Shana.
Correct. Yeah, I saw that.
I'll just read. How does marriage and or recognition of children work between different tribes? So for instance, like you, Jacqueline, how do you decide which tribe you are for a legal sense?
Well, my parents decided. Some tribes allow dual enrollment, but not all. And my parents' tribes do not allow dual enrollment, so they had to choose. And because we are matrilineal, my mother's people are matrilineal. You know, they view it as what your mother is, what you are, right? And so that is, you know, I remember one of my first jobs out of college. Actually, I was in Albuquerque, and I actually worked for Futures for Children for a few years, and I remember there was there was a lot of Native people working there. One of my coworkers, he was Apache, and we were throwing him a going away party because he was leaving to go work for the Herd Museum in Phoenix, and he sort of chided me. He was like, you know, you're always talking about being, you know, Dakota, your father's people, but you have to remember that, you know, what you are is you know, what your mother, your Diné, you know, because Apaches are very close, are very close relatives. And so he was kind of talking about that. And that's really, so my parents chose the Navajo Nation to enroll me and my siblings in, but, you know, I still have, you know, going home to Lake Andes on the Yankton Sioux Reservation, it's still something I do regularly to see my family, and I care a lot about that community. I did some reporting before the pandemic happened in the fall of 2019 about the flooding of my dad's hometown, and I was able to help some of the poorest people in our tribe whose homes were flooded and get them FEMA funds, you know, and that was felt like quite I was able, you know, to have them call me, different families call me up, and these are really poor people and living in HUD housing, you know, and having to deal with, you know, all their furniture being ruined, their cars being ruined, you know, their basements filled with water with pumps in them, and their kids getting MRSA and E. coli from standing water outside their homes, and then, you know, to have them call me and say that they got the FEMA came out, the FEMA folks called me and were like, we're here, you know, and then they came out and they gave, by the end of the week, each family had like at least $4,000 to help them deal with all of that. And that felt really good. I mean, I guess I just, you know, it's through my relationships, you know, and it's, and because most Navajos are full bloods, I would say 90% of Navajos are full bloods. Being half Navajo makes me a bit unusual. I'm not a typical Navajo person. My mother, Navajo is her first language, and she was born out in Hogan. You know, my grandparents were traditional Navajos who didn't speak English, and but my other side of my family, my dad's family, you know, I've been going to college for a while. For, as you saw, my grandmother's uncle had gone to seminary school and everything, and so and was Episcopalian, right? And so it's just I have. Before I really began doing a lot of writing, I really tried to figure out what that meant exactly. Like, what is trying to, that's the thing is, like, I actually took, when my children were born, I took 10 years out of my life just to figure out and do journaling, to figure out how to explain my heritage, because it's mixed, right? I'm 13/16 Native American, 3/16 European, but I really wanted to explain that accurately, not to try to present myself in a really just in a stereotypical way, right? And or a dishonest way. And it's crazy that I spent all that time trying to make sure I was accurate, but then you have people who have no Native ancestry just completely lying, and now they have $225,000 a year jobs as professors. I mean, here at Portland State, in the city where I live, all three of the Indigenous nations faculty, the tenured ones, are all pretendians. They have these are all white people play acting, and we did a conference back in March and April this year at Michigan State on pretendianism called Unsettling Genealogies. And it was heartrending to hear the stories about how, Native students at Michigan State fought to get Native studies. They started working on in the late 60s, early 70s. And by the 1980s, they had a department and what happens? All the positions go to pretendians, and they drive the Indians out. And so no Michigan State tribal members are part of that program anymore, and they've changed the name from Native American to Indigenous, which means anyone in the world can sit at that table, right? They just push all the tribal members from Michigan out the door at a university which is a land grant university that has in its charter, a responsibility to the tribes of Michigan, right? They just push them out. And yeah, they just take the spoils. Do you know what I mean? So it's they actually had a pretendian running the Indigenous studies. He changed the name to the Indigenous studies. They're just everywhere, and they are by far preferred. It definitely seems like that. Well, I mean, we definitely see that where white people hiring other white people in red face, they just prefer the person performing the identity to actual people who have endured the traumas that they are trying to somehow address through diversity hiring.
Well, I think the best way to close this is with a statement, two statements that I read that I really like. I can't remember who said them. Somebody once said that people like Indians when they're talking about spirit guides and shamanism, but not when they're talking about land loss and genocide and oppression. And somebody once said too that people like Jews when they're dead, when they are, for instance, Anne Frank, who will always be a 15-year-old girl, or people who died as martyrs. But when we talk about anti-Semitism and our oppression, they don't like us as much. So in some ways, maybe we could say that for some people, their feelings about Jews and their feelings about American Indians are negative, and for some very parallel reasons. And with that, I think I will thank Tammy for her excellent work in making this happen. I'm not a technical person. Oh, God, no. And she's done a great job. And again, to thank our speakers and to thank, excuse me, Rabbi Vioy and all of you. And hopefully, I think the JCC has your email address. So if we do more of these programs, you will be notified and you can sign up, and we will let you know where this will be. The video will be uploaded. God, uploaded. It's the extent of my technical skills there. Well, thank you very much. And I hope we will all see each other again and learn from each other in the future. Thank you so much to everyone who's been involved.
Thank you
for all your
Thank
hard
you.
work. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank
Take care,
you.
everybody.